We're asking English 10 students to cultivate their intellectual curiosity. And so we thought that we would just share some things that we are curious about. This is your English 10 team. I know one pressing general topic is the effects that cell phones have on students and their learning.
Negative.
Negative?
There's negative effects.
Negative effect, okay.
This is something you were reading?
I read, funny you should ask that, Nick. As it turns out, I read an article yesterday, and it discussed how the depression and suicide rates from 2010 to 2015 have sharply risen in teenagers in America, and the one thing that a lot of researchers are looking at is cell phone usage and social media.
Mm-hmm. I read that article because you passed it on to me.
Sharing
It
is
said-
caring.
Yeah, it said 73% of students have an iPhone now.
That's too much.
Mhm.
Well, what do you guys think?
I struggle with cell phone usage because I feel like it's a good thing but a bad thing. In terms of use your powers for good or use your powers for evil, and I feel like more kids currently are using their powers for evil purposes and not how can I use this to expand my thinking or how can I use this to advance my knowledge, but yet instead I'm going to play this game or I'm going to go on Twitter and blast out or call out this person or I'm going to make this, unwise decision instead of using it for a tool for knowledge.
It distracts them.
It
Yeah,
does.
so what is the articles that you were reading, what is it about phone use that is leading to, you said mental illness uptick?
Mhm.
Yes.
So do they say just the fact of looking at a screen or what kids are using it for?
I think it's the usage of the cell phones, and a conversation I had with a student yesterday was talking about why are people so negative on social media, especially teenagers, and how negative they are. And he goes, I guess in the olden days, if you're negative to someone, you would just get it through secondhand knowledge, like someone else talking to you, hearsay,
Yeah.
or someone said it right to your face. And it's created a culture of, like really.
Downtrodden.
Yeah,
negative.
it's just incredible.
Negativity.
Just
Yeah.
all around negativity. One thing that was pointed to us from our producer was the idea of, if you could put that up there again, phone versus app.
Mhm.
That's an interesting
So is it the device itself or is it the particular applications that we're
Applications.
using on those
Right.
phones?
Do kids know that apps mean applications?
Yeah,
Probably
I
not.
think
It's
they do.
more of an adult lingo.
Yeah,
Sure.
but one of the things that the article, talked about is that face-to-face communication is lost. And that's one of it calls it the wellspring of human happiness, is your interactions with other people.
Sure.
And we're losing that segment of our society.
The cultivation of your personality online and how maybe much of a contrast that is from your personality in person. I know from my master's courses, I'm taking the marketing aspect of it, is you see who people are, their online world, and how much different is that from their real world, and like where's the reality at?
Shout out to my 7th hour English 10 today because we were talking about this exact topic. And I actually asked them, do you guys feel like social media is actually making you more social or is it hurting your ability to be social beings? And they're like, well, what do you mean? And so we actually asked and started talking about, Mr. Murley was in the building today. We saw him walk by and I was like, so if I asked you and you'd never talked to him before, go ask Mr. Murley a question about your school environment. Would you want to do that? And a lot of kids are like, well, if you told me I had to, I would, but I wouldn't want to just go up and ask him a question face to face. And I said, so what would you think that you would choose to do? And they said, well, I would be okay with emailing, or I'd be okay with sending him something, via insert some sort of technology here. But that actual face-to-face connection, most kids said they did not want to have to do that. They would do it if they had to, but that would not be their first option or mode of communication.
Yeah. So I'm teasing out a couple different avenues for a research question here, Mr. Borison.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like we've talked about what is it about phones that actually leads to mental illness? Is it the devices themselves or is it the things we do on those phones?
Mhm.
What effect, potentially you could talk about what effect does social media have on our mental well-being? That would be an avenue it seems like we're pursuing.
Yeah.
And then also, what are the effects another possibility would be, what are the effects of phones and devices replacing face-to-face communication? Those seem to be the three big nodes that we,
I think those would
Talked
be
about.
very interesting avenues to look at. One thing that popped up in my brain was the addictive nature of cell phones and especially social media. And so what could a question for that be is what addictive tendencies can be cultivated in the teenage years
And I know you can find research.
through
on that.
social media use?
and that's under the umbrella of the mental illness.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so what's our
I
second
know
topic?
another thing that we've talked about at lunch, just kind of on our own, is addition of a school resource officer
Mhm.
at Liberty High School. And I've been in a school where there was a resource officer. And I think sometimes students, if you don't know what that is, that's the addition of a police officer that is connected to the school and works within the school to help students solve problems.
So they'd be here daily on a regular basis. Their presence would always be at Liberty.
You know, what do you think about having a resource officer?
I think a good question to look at is what would be maybe different, if you looked at it statewide, what is the different perception of schools who have a resource officer versus not having a resource officer? And looking at community members' reactions to, like, why do we need a resource officer?
Right.
So that'd be an avenue to look at.
I had heard that there's been a push in the past in Iowa City schools to get a resource officer, and in each case, there's been
It was denied.
community pushback.
Yeah, yeah.
Community pushback,
Mhm.
because the perception is what? Our schools aren't safe.
They need
There's
policing.
Right.
our kids need policing.
Mhm.
We talk as teachers sometimes about the school-to-prison pipeline, this idea that
Right.
kids who get in trouble a lot at school, then end up with a bad relationship to law enforcement, and then they leave school and go straight to a prison environment, which is not something we want. And yeah, it's a perception of putting a police officer in the building is going to make that.
Maybe one of our
More likely.
questions could be, is there better discipline or fewer fights
Right.
at schools that are comparable demographics and size, that have a school resource officer, and a school that does not have one?
That was my question, was overall behavior in the schools that do have a regular police presence or that resource officer there. What does their statistics or their data look like in terms of some of the behavior issues like fights or disrespect or attitude issues that,
Mhm.
we've been seeing?
If you go from this angle too, if you think about having a school resource officer here, if you looked at other schools that are comparable to us, is there a better sense of safety? Like, do students feel safer?
There's student perception.
Student perceptions,
Right.
do they feel safer with a school resource officer? And on the other end,
It's a good point.
if you keep going on that thread of thinking, do students who feel safer feel more comfortable in an academic atmosphere? Like, is there a correlation between safety, or at least a perception of safety, and academic achievement?
And kind of spinning off of that, something similar in relation to this topic of, there's a problem currently in the US with perception of police officers and their role in their job and what they do, and are they actually helping us and protecting us?
Yeah.
Would getting a school resource officer here in our environment help build some of those positive relationships with students and see that they are here for good? They want to help us. They want to steer us down the right path. Could that help build or establish some of those relationships?
Or would it have the opposite effect of
Or it could have the opposite.
alienating, isolating students who,
I already have a cop at school yelling at me all the time, or on my case about something, or whatever it might be, and I'm only a freshman. Is that hurting that too? I've
and
seen
you
it work
already,
there.
you or your family maybe already fundamentally distrust law enforcement.
Law enforcement, that
Sure.
makes sense as well.
What happens on the other side of that argument if we feel that schools are not a safe place? You sent me an article today about teacher training when it comes to school shootings.
Yeah.
Why is there a push, if it is acceptable for so many schools to have training to have teachers ward off an active shooter, why wouldn't you want to have a trained officer in the building if this is a serious problem, an epidemic that's happening around schools in America? What would be the pushback if it's okay for teachers to be trained on
Right.
on this sort of defense? Then why wouldn't a community, or why wouldn't people want an officer?
Do you have anything to sum up, Nick?
I have, yeah, I've been just sort of taking notes as everybody's been talking and maybe figuring out the different channels that these different questions can lead us to. So again, it seems like a couple of different avenues that we could pursue with this question. One of them being, what are the advantages, disadvantages of having an SR, a school resource officer in the building? You know, what happens to kids' sense of safety, perception of the school environment, maybe even their academic achievement, like Mr. Borison suggested. But then also, what are the public perception barriers to getting a school resource officer into the building in the first place? And that might be a different question that you could pursue. Like, what have schools done successfully or unsuccessfully to get officers in the building?
Well,
So you've got some possibilities.
yeah, this collection of people, it's really nice to get together, especially when lightning strikes